This next session, Peter, thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about getting that excellent EUX from AVD. In order to do that, let's just do a quick introduction. I've already introduced myself as a product manager here for Login BSI, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Peter. I'm a program manager lead on the Azure Virtual Desktop team at Microsoft. My team owns a bunch of stuff: security, identity, management. So with management, you could think of FS Logics, but also MEM, Intune related things, and then a lot of stuff around the operating system and performance, which is something we'll be talking about today.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And, I know your time is precious, given all that's going on in your world. AVD has been the topic of conversation for this event and for the last couple of years, honestly, when it comes to Login BSI and our greater market. One of the things that you may not have seen if you weren't joined in was Christian Brinkoff and Ruben Sprite's session about the VDI Like a Pro survey. And I just thought you might find this interesting, some of the tidbits that they offered that really are pointing some pretty big fingers in your direction, right? So number one, what are the top 3 workspace initiatives? Desktop as a service is it was the highest, and Microsoft Office 365. I think both of those are a very big focus of AVD. Windows applications still at around 70% for the Win32 based applications. And I think, when it comes to the choice we have now for multi-session OS and Windows 10, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure, many of your customers appreciate having that client OS now kind of in the cloud. Any remarks about that?
No, definitely. This is something we see as well. I think Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, those are all services that have a good right of existence because there's legacy apps, there's Win32 applications. I think there's been research, and it's not just our kids that will handle and use Windows apps like traditional Win32 applications on a daily basis, but also their kids.
Yeah.
So it will be around for a while.
That's right.
Which is good for our business, I suppose. But
for
yeah,
sure.
so it will be around for a while for sure.
Yeah. Good to see there is a home for those applications as we see the industry moving towards cloud. And kind of along those lines in the survey as well, I think, between hybrid and pure public cloud, we're seeing both of those segments grow, whereas on-prem is shrinking. So definitely some more data points that are really pointing in the direction of the market kind of chasing the cloud. I thought this one was cool too. I mean, Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session is not a very old OS when we talk about it being publicly available. And we already see almost 21% of the share of any of the respondents that were commenting about multi-session user or multi-user operating system. So that looks really good too. I think, what do we have on all VMs running on AVD? What percentage are running Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session?
So roughly 70% of all the VMs as part of AVD, they run Win 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. Then, so that's the biggest chunk is 70%. And then close to, what is it, like 28% is Windows 10 Enterprise, just single session. And then whatever is left is everything else combined. So we're talking Windows Server and some Windows 7. Windows 7, I'm super glad to see that that's a low percentage. Yeah. Windows Server is surprising. Like that's dropping quite rapidly, and mostly in favor of Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Super cool. And then another big kind of arrow pointing in the direction of AVD is in the question, which virtual desktop as a service solution are you using or will you introduce? A majority of them appear to have kind of a slice of AVD mixed in with them. I think if you kind of add all these up, it's a little over 50%. So another promising thing when it comes to AVD. And obviously, I'm a fanboy, so I'm pretty excited about this as well. I've been doing quite a bit of research in this area, so good to see the market kind of going in this direction. And then lastly, the biggest challenges in using or adopting public cloud. I mean, the two biggest challenges: creating a positive, cost-effective business case and performance of the solution. So I think with that, one of the things I'd like you to cover, Peter, is maybe we could talk about what those are from your perspective, right? And where it's come from, and what we potentially have to look forward to.
Yeah, sure. No, cost is a big factor. We totally get it, and we're doing lots of work to make sure to drive down the total TCO, the cost of ownership. You can think of innovations like Hibernate support, which is something we as Microsoft are actively working on. Also making sure you can use, from a licensing perspective, you can use your existing Windows license, and then you can run the VM against Linux rates. So you're not charged twice for the intellectual property called Windows. And then there's also net new innovations on Windows, making sure that we make Windows more performant. And those changes, I want to just spend a minute to talk about what kind of changes we made to Windows to make the performance better. And those you can separate into 3 separate buckets. So one of them is everything leading up to Windows 10 version 2004, which has been out for a little while. And then Windows 10 version 2004 with all the updates. So you could think of 2004 itself with the latest cumulative updates, but also 20H1, 20H2, 21H1, etc. And then let's spend a minute to talk about Windows 11, what you can expect there, because that's where the majority of the performance improvements actually landed. So in the first bucket, everything leading up to Windows 10 version 2004, we made tons of improvements in MSIX registrations and state repository. So for those of you who have done some more granular performance optimizations or looked at the bottlenecks, you'll find that a ton of CPU cycles and memory usage, etc., goes into these 2 components. One of the changes we made is on Win 10 Enterprise multi-session specifically. We made a change that every time when an MSIX application is present, normally it's during the logon process, it's registered. And that means it's kind of optimized for the end user to launch that application. However, if you don't use it, you just spend lots of precious CPU cycles registering that application while you may not even use it. So in multi-session, we changed so that all of these MSIX or AppX packages are registered the moment you launch them. That means you'll take a bit of a hit. So every time when you launch an application like that, there's a delay of about a second, which most people are fine with, and it's only the first time. But the benefit is if you don't use any MSIX or AppX package at all, or modern app, then you don't have that performance penalty during the logon process. Nice. So that's one of the biggest changes we made there. And that resulted in, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think we could service almost the double amount of users during the 9 a.m. logon storms. So that was quite significant. So make sure you have the latest update there. I think some of these changes also landed in 20H2. So that's, if you have the choice, like which operating system you have to run, make sure you're on 20H2 or newer. Also, make sure you have the latest cumulative update. So that's just the Patch Tuesday security update. It's not just security updates. We also tuck in some performance optimizations there. And specifically, we've been working with the MSIX or AppX team to make their technology perform better in a multi-session environment. So we've looked at tons of things, like, for example, maybe we could register applications device-wide instead of per user. It turned out that that was just a change which was impossible to make. So instead, we focused on making the existing technology just perform better. That resulted in tons of changes, and some of those we could backport. What that means is when a developer checks in code, it's in a in development branch, so something that hasn't shipped yet. And we've looked at whatever was backportable to in-market operating systems. So some changes we cannot do because there's schema upgrades, and then the quality and just the overall reliability of the operating system is at risk. So we can only backport whatever feels good that we think will not cause any damage. And the result was about 5% less CPU usage during a logon storm. So again, Windows is able to service more logons at the same time. Now, the biggest change is landing in Windows 11, because that's where everything we could check in, but simply wasn't backportable, that ended up in Windows 11. We've worked with all kinds of partner teams within Microsoft, also with Shell and with the DWM team. And all of those combined is about 40%, so 40, which is substantial, 40% less CPU usage during a logon storm.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think that's quite significant. It also has very nice side effects. Like we've seen in the early days, lots of black screens during logon. That should be reduced by now by a ton because of all these improvements.
Fantastic. Yeah, I see all these things in test. The logon definitely takes a big hit, and I know AppX and MSIX and all those things really do have an impact on that. So, but I can also say that in the testing I've done, I had been in the practice of optimizing my images before testing them, but lately I haven't seen quite as big of a difference between an optimized versus a non-optimized image from the gallery for AVD with Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. So, maybe a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. We get this question quite a bit, like, hey, why is Microsoft not releasing an optimized version that has ran all these community-driven scripts? And I'm not trying to throw the community under the bus here because those are great assets. But we get that question quite a bit. And we've looked at those scripts in detail. We spend a lot of time investigating like how much does it truly matter. And the findings you can kind of categorize in 3 separate buckets. So one is some of the changes made in those scripts are simply not recommended or sometimes even unsupported. Now, for example, if you disable the antivirus, Windows Defender, yeah, sure, your performance will be better. But obviously, you'll take a big hit from a security perspective. So from a Microsoft perspective, we could never do that, right? If your organization has a third-party antivirus, sure, go for it. But we as Microsoft, we can't do that for obvious reasons. We also see some of these scripts disable, and this is a random example, is disable the Windows firewall, the service itself, which is unsupported. And actually, you'll lose like basic functionality if you do that. You don't have to use the Windows firewall. You can use any third-party product. And there's documented ways of making sure the Windows firewall is not doing anything, but stopping the service is unsupported, which is also documented, by the way. So that's the first category, which we wouldn't recommend. Then the second category of changes, and this is the vast majority, is changes that simply have a negligible effect, like very small effect on the overall performance. All kinds of little things that don't really matter, but they do have an impact on either support or sometimes user experience. And let me just focus on support for a second. We've had many cases where customers call Microsoft and say, hey, this is broken. And then we manage to root cause the problem to one of these optimization scripts, changing things that don't really have a beneficial performance consequence. Sometimes services are disabled that would disable by itself anyway, or simply they don't do anything if they're idle. So, the benefit there is not a lot.
Yep.
And then the third category is optimizations that truly matter, because if we ran these scripts and we did see a very good performance improvement, so then we focus at what are these scripts doing or these tools that truly matter. And again, it led us to our famous friends, the MSIX or AppX packages. And one of the interesting findings there is that the presence itself of specific MSIX or AppX packages take a big hit on the performance. So even if you don't use them, but the presence itself has a very negative impact on the logon performance.
Mm-hmm. Something I've also seen.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? I mean, then the question is, well, why don't you just remove those? And then it's tricky because maybe you've seen. So apparently, Mark has been scavenging my Twitter handle, which is awesome. At least I have someone reading it, which is great. But one of the things I posted a little while ago is a link to a survey where we asked, hey, for your business or your company, which of these applications, these MSIX apps, can we potentially remove? And the finding there was that with the sheer amount of customers that Microsoft has, it's very difficult. We'll always find a company out there that says, "Oh, Candy Crush is critical for my enterprise. Without Candy Crush, my business is going down." Now, obviously, Candy Crush is a bit of a silly example, but I truly hope that's not the case. That there's no such company
Yeah.
out there other than Candy Crush itself.
Yeah. Well,
But you get the gist.
yeah, I almost wonder if Candy Crush might be in one of the new gallery images for Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. Just kidding. No, but one of the things that I've really appreciated, and I'm sure many of the enterprises appreciate, is that the Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session, my favorite flavor is the 20H2, the latest and greatest with the Microsoft 365 apps. But when I initially had started testing WVD at the time and Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session, I had to install Office. I had to install FS Logics. We had to disable OneDrive, and Teams wasn't even installed, right? But now we have this image. It's got all of them installed. But I think some of the coolest parts are the fact that OneDrive is installed per machine, I believe, as well as Teams.
Yeah, that's right. So when we launched Azure Virtual Desktop, or back then Windows Virtual Desktop, we only had Windows 10 Enterprise and Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session.
Yep.
And quickly, customers came and partners came to us and said, "Hey, we're all just manually installing Office. Why don't you do this for us?"
Yep.
So now we have an image which is actually managed by the Office team. So they install Office according to their best practices, which
Oh,
which is
fantastic.
helpful.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then quickly, like you mentioned, OneDrive is installed in program files, not in the user profile. So you don't have like 20 binaries laying around that are updated and stuff.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and the other thing is Teams. So Teams is installed now with audio and video offloading. And we're constantly looking for feedback. So if Blair, you or anyone else on this meeting has feedback on what we should change, we're open
Oh,
to
I
hear it.
will. I will. Actually, just got done developing our first Teams workload for Login Enterprise, and it's definitely behaves very differently than many of the other apps that we're used to, but it's crucial, right? It has to be available nowadays for our UC benefits and things like that. The other thing I thought was pretty cool was that I think you get 100 exploratory licenses for Teams with your subscription. So that's really helped me to do a lot of testing as well. I really found that useful. And the other thing too is FS Logics was a part of the latest testing that we had done together, and found out that profile containers are just a fantastic addition. They're not slowing down the login process at all. If anything, they're helping. And being able to kind of keep your data portable is just fantastic. So that was great. Nice thing to see. Last thing, and I know we only have about 5 more minutes left, is Azure AD joined VMs, improved user experience. I'm sure people are wondering if you could quickly answer that question, how that happens.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll keep it very brief and crisp because I know you have more content.
Yeah.
But definitely, and this is not just limited to VMs, but also physical devices. Like AD joined, we've seen, IT admins applying pretty much all 3,000 GPOs that we have available. They have login scripts, which I've seen login scripts with 3,000 lines where whoever made it passed away 10 years ago and no one wants to touch that login script anymore, afraid it will break. On Azure AD joined VMs, you typically use an MDM like MAM or Intune to manage those devices. And there, the whole management is done way more efficiently using something called CSPs. So we don't have that legacy of 3,000 GPOs with WMI filters and all kinds of quirky stuff. So overall, the end user experience is better because it just, from a performance perspective, it's designed in a more efficient way.
Yep. Nice. Nice. Well, look forward to testing that one out as well. Thanks, Peter. One thing that I'd like to do is just quickly cover 5 tips that we've kind of discovered in a lot of the testing that we've done with Peter's team and with many other enterprises around the world on Azure Virtual Desktop. You can find all of this information in a recent blog that I've published, but let's just quickly flip through them in the interest of time. So number one, get to know your users. If you're going to be testing or sizing or doing anything like that, you need to know what kind of users you're going to be supporting. And in order to do that, you need to understand the apps they use, how they use them, and what their feelings are about them. Not just whether they like the application or not, but does it perform well, right? That's an important part of the way that we test at Login BSI. It's a lot. Also, we've been able to confirm some of the user counts for Azure Virtual Directory and the instances that we subscribe to there, right? Typically, I'm seeing somewhere around the maximum users per vCPU in the testing that I'm doing at about 2 per vCPU. And there's 3 different types of classifications for worker. Task workers, they'll usually use a browser and a line of business app or something like Excel. Knowledge workers will use the entire Office suite plus line of business apps and Edge or Chrome. And then power workers will use that set. So you can kind of see they're each kind of subsets of each other. When it comes to testing them, what I like to do is take that set and order it in a way, a workflow that the user is going to follow through. And this is an example of a workflow that I fire at AVD when I do some testing on it. And you can see all of the applications that every single user that logs in is going to go through the same process to really put stress, so I can see how things are going on the back end. Now, how do I know that when they're going well? I let my performance counters do the talking. They're the ones that are going to tell the story. And I believe it or not, it's very simple to collect, and you don't have to collect that many to get that story. From a login enterprise perspective, I look at application start performance. Here you can already see right around 32 sessions, you're starting to see a very different spike when it comes to the latency of the application starting. So it's pretty clear that we've hit some type of bottleneck there. It really gives us some insight into our scalability for that one. Login performance is another. When it comes to the Windows OS, there are 3 that, oh, hey, I forgot to tell you about something, the end user experience utility. It's basically, like the Windows Experience Index, except we've now developed one that lets you test that and use in terms of testing. This is coming soon by the end of the year. Please reach out if you'd like to learn more. We're looking for people to actually help us in doing some of the exploration of this. Yep. And then the performance data from the Windows OS CPU and memory, always a good indicator. And a new one, user input delay. Just as a rule of thumb, I like to see the average of the maximums be somewhere under 200 milliseconds. Collect your baseline. We usually run a manual application test with Login Enterprise that gives you kind of your best baselines. End user experience is going to point to certain components in there that are running either fast or slow. Like I said, it's kind of like this old Windows Experience Index. You guys remember that? Where it gives you a single score for the experience that you're having as a user. Now imagine your virtual users being able to gather that kind of score. I did a quick test with my Dell laptop. Of course, my Dell laptop's pretty souped up. I got an 8.6 on that one. And you can see here, I was looking at different capacities on my Azure Virtual Desktop solutions, and you can see pretty much how they score and how they decline in score as we kind of scale up the number of sessions per each. So again, look for that kind of information coming from us as we release the end user experience scoring. We're super excited about this, and it definitely is going to provide you a lot of insight into your solutions. 2 more tips real quick. Find that sweet spot. Basically what I mean here is just take 4 times the number of vCPUs as my recommendation. Shoot that many sessions at that target instance, see how it behaves, and it's going to tell you where that sweet spot is. You can see by how quickly the CPU increases here or the user input delay where that sweet spot's going to be. I do the same thing with application start times, login times, and CPU saturation or utilization. Very good indicators on where that sweet spot is. And then lastly, and with the EUX score, you can kind of see what happens as I saturate the server. We were just talking about login performance, and you can see what login performance does and how well it can recover. You can see at 24 and 28 sessions on a D8S, it doesn't really recover all that well. The last one is be the hero. Take all the testing that you're doing. You've got the tools. Run those tests continuously, and see, in production, when you run into any issues, these virtual users are going to be the first to tell you what's going on. So I'm going to call it quits for that, since we're a little over time. Again, check out the blog on this one. Super happy to have you guys in the session today. Thanks, Peter, so much.